Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Dual Broadcast. Oh my goodness, the Dual Broadcast.
That's a different show right there.
Yeah,
Broadcast.
a
Yeah,
broadcast. I
that's
make up words all the time, so that might become part of my lexicon. But the Dual Broadcast of the Pink Flame of Liberty and the Big L podcast, and I have a guest with me. Mark Whitney, who is a candidate for the presidential nomination of the Libertarian Party. And I asked him to kick this off with just a little impromptu intro and thoughts. And we don't really have many questions planned. I have a couple. Other than that, it's going to be a pretty loose conversation. If you're listening on any of these streams and you have a question, I can see your comments on the right hand side here of this little fancy pants software suite I got going on. So if you do have any questions or comments, type them in chat. And as long as, they're within the topic and nothing about Harambe, we'll discuss it, most likely. No promises, but almost promises. All right. Away with you, Mark. Whatever you'd like to say.
Thanks, Karen. I think it bears saying that when it comes to nonverbal communication, you're definitely the number one libertarian on the nonverbal. What an unforgettable image. I think we were first together in Tucson, Arizona earlier this year. Again, Mark Whitney happily owned the title, the worst politician in America. It's never been a goal of mine, even though I'm running for president, to be a great politician, because to me, politicians are posers and pretenders. And we live in this world right now where Donald Trump is the president. And whatever else can be said about Donald Trump, we know exactly who he is. And I think there's a value to that. I am CEO of the Law.net Corporation in San Diego, a company I founded 20 years ago. I sell the law to lawyers. So I've been successful in the dreaded for-profit private market. A lot of presidential candidates in the Libertarian Party worship at the altar of the profit market, but have not been successful in it. For me, liberty do. It's not something you talk about. It's not philosophy. It is what you do. It is action. And I'm a man of action. My family is a family of action. My wife got her law degree in December at the age of 60, finished number 2 in her class. My youngest sons, 32 and 35, are both very successful. And we're a family that's very solution-oriented. We have a fantastic libertarian life story. My wife and I have known each other since the 6th grade. She has a name. Her name is Julie. I sometimes refer to her as the current Mrs. Whitney, just as a joke. We've been together forever. We started dating the last year of high school. And we've been through thick and thin together as entrepreneurs in this country. We have a lot of strong opinions about that. I'm a big fan of the Constitution, several copies of which I keep close by. I'm especially a big fan of the Bill of Rights. I'm a big fan also of, let me see if I can put my hands on it here. Big fan of the Libertarian Party platform. I think these two platforms go very nicely together. I'm not looking to overthrow or dissolve the United States. I'm not an anarchist, although I do hate authority. And with that as background, I'm looking forward to a good show, Karen.
All righty. Now, actually, we didn't meet, but I first saw you in California, which was, I think, an earlier. No, you're right. Tucson was earlier. They're the first convention of the year.
Right.
But there was a really nice debate in California, and you did a really good job in that debate.
I thought so too.
Yeah, that was a really good debate. And at the time, I was struck by a personal story you had told of your son, who has a successful business. And you know what story I'm referring to. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. My youngest son, Chris, is autistic. He has been a very interesting guy his whole life. We never told him he was autistic. We just raised Chris to be Chris. And Chris is a guy who was born 9 weeks premature, which I'm sure explains the autism, although I'm no expert. So throughout his life, we've just sort of managed to what we perceive to be his aptitudes. Chris became very interested in figure skating when he was 9 and was a champion figure skater. He has a box of gold medals. He beat most of the uh, as before he was 15, he beat most of the other young men, boys in the country who went on to become national competitors, national champions. When he was in his mid-teens, however, he sprouted up to 6'5", and his center of gravity was too high to do the triple jumps, and that took a real toll on him. But Chris has gone spent some years in public school. He spent some years doing homeschooling. He spent some years doing a combination. Here in San Diego, we had a school that was sort of for gifted overachievers that was connected to the public school, although we had to pay tuition to send Chris there. But he is someone who's always been such an intellectual challenge to raise because he has these crazy strong points, and he loves video games. And when his Xbox broke, he invented a repair kit that went viral, and he kept rolling the money over and rolling the money over until eventually he grew an Amazon business that at its peak was doing about $15 million a year. And I remember it was a couple of years back. I remembered, and those of you who have adult children, you may have these moments. I remember when Chris was in the 4th grade, we lived in this little Ivy League, this little sort of Curry and Ive towns in New Hampshire called Hanover, New Hampshire, where Dartmouth College is. Only about 7,000 people. But there was a little drugstore there. You know, these little old-fashioned drugstores where they have greeting cards and every little thing you could want. And they used to, near the front door, when Chris was like in the 3rd and 4th grade, they used to keep a basket of Beanie Babies. And Beanie Babies were collectibles. And at a young age, Chris was doing retail arbitrage. He used to grab the latest Beanie Babies, and then he would run them down to my wife's office and sell it to all the other women in the office for twice what he paid. So he's been an evil capitalist from a young age. We just sort of have that in our DNA, us Whitneys. We can't help ourselves.
That's fantastic. My personal interest in the story, and we need to hear more like that, is I'm autistic myself. But I was late diagnosed and what would formerly be called Asperger's. So,
right. Chris, the same.
Okay. And I think there's vast untapped potential in the Aspies. Of course, absolutely. I'm somewhat biased, right?
Yeah.
But I love to hear those success stories because too often we don't hear them. And if you let, I believe, and I think a libertarian free market would do this, where you don't try to force all people into one learning model,
right? That
all the different ways people think will have an opportunity to blossom. So I think that story is just so fantastically inspirational.
Yeah, just one of the things you said there about, having sort of a one-size-fits-all learning model. My wife and I grew up in a very blue-collar small town in Vermont and went to public school there. But just an hour and a half away was this community where Dartmouth College is that I spoke of. And neither of our parents at any point in our childhood thought to say, gee, there's an Ivy League town an hour and a half away. Maybe we ought to drive over the hill and see what's going on over there. When my wife and I ended up there raising our kids, one of the things I noticed is that these very quote unquote successful Ivy League parents, the two biggest employers there were Dartmouth College and the hospital associated with Dartmouth College. And one of the things I noticed is that beginning in the womb, when one of our neighbors' wives would become pregnant, they were automatically working to get this baby that had yet to be born into an Ivy League school. And the amount of anxiety and stress and everything that was imposed on their kids was unbelievable. And I did not want to be one of those parents. I've always been a parent who has had a tremendous amount of confidence in myself. And I always felt that if my wife and I provided a good home and we modeled things properly, that everything would work out fine for our children. And one of the things I love about the United States as an entrepreneur, as a creative soul, is I think we have the biggest sandbox in the world. And I truly believe that there is a path for everybody if people are just left to their own devices to kind of figure out who they are by process of elimination,
Yep. Agreed. And before the big thing that I had wanted to talk to you about is what had happened in Florida. But we do have some questions, and I want to give priority to the people who,
Okay.
came, took their time to ask questions.
Right on.
And we have a question here. I think I can put it on the screen here. Right. Aya Katz asks, what is your position about repealing all income tax?
I favor repeal of the 16th Amendment, as does the Libertarian Party platform. These days, I've actually pivoted from worst politician in America to calling myself the platform candidate, because there's so many candidates who are at odds with the platform. But beyond the actual monetary penalty that the income tax imposes on everybody, as an entrepreneur, one of the reasons I favor repeal of the 16th Amendment, and by the way, I also favor the government costs $400 a week per household to operate, but it only takes in $200 a week. It borrows the other $200. So I favor, what I would do as a nominee, if I'm doing a 5-minute guest spot on Kimmel, is I would talk in terms of getting the federal government down to $100 a week per household. And I favor a use tax to fund that. I think it's fair and proportional. The income tax, by contrast, what I was getting to before, is if we have this amazing sandbox that I referred to, but the compliance that we have to do in accounting to the federal government and myself here in California and many other states is so onerous. It's so onerous, and it sucks up so much creative headspace that what happens, and this is true for myself, is true for my sons, is true for many other entrepreneurs that I know. You get to a point, maybe you build a business up to $1 million or $2 million a year, and let's say you're taking $200,000 a year out of it. That's a pretty nice life, and you've got it kind of in a system, and it works. And you have the freedom at that point to sit there and go, do I want to continue to grow? Do I want to get bigger? Because as I get bigger, the compliance becomes more and more onerous, more and more time consuming. I'm hiring more and more people. So, when you decide to grow, you're making a lifestyle decision as it is, because there's going to be more management, more issues just from the self. And when you have the threat that is incorporated with all of this accounting that we do to the IRS, it's even true in public companies too. I could never be a CEO of a public company because CEOs have to. It was part of it was part of some act. I can't remember it, but CEOs have to sign a document where they personally swear and testify under penalties of perjury that everything in those corporate tax returns is exactly right.
And how can they know?
You can't do that, right? But yet you're put on the hook for it. So it's the IRS is bad for business, and anything that's bad for business is bad for a system that relies on free markets that need the creative elbow room to flex and grow. So that's what it is beyond the normal, just onerous financial penalty the IRS imposes on people.
When you said use tax, did you mean like user fees? Could you explain what you mean?
It could be any combination of dollars, fees, taxes, whatever you want to call it. Any combination of things that is incorporated to your decision to do something, but it would be known. Like I know if I go to a restaurant in San Diego, I'm going to be paying an extra 9%. There's no test for race or gender or income or class. Everybody pays that 9%. And that money goes to help fund the fire department, the police department, and repairs to the roads and all these things. So I think there are legitimate reasons for the federal government. I think having a government that is designed to secure our rights, to secure our right to sit here and talk shit about the government freely without fear of being arrested, I think that's a purpose for the federal government. I think taking the federal public defender's office and moving it out of the Department of Justice and making a cabinet level office to show that we believe criminal defendants should have a great defense, that they shouldn't get 10 minutes from somebody. I think that it's good to have a federal government to secure our right to bear arms. So these are the reasons we created the federal government in the first place. But somehow, through the administration of Democrat and Republican politicians and judges, it has grown into this administrative state, this enormous corporate state that really contrives against individuals who are trying to do what my family's been able to do successfully, which is raise themselves up from a very average childhood, average lifestyle, into a lifestyle where now I'm 60 years old and I'm able to donate the next 10 years to supporting this party and trying to make it politically viable.
I'm going to have some follow-ups on that in a bit, but it might be a little bit outside the questioner's their original intent. So I want to go on to this flows directly into another question. Jeff Adams asked if you support the libertarian platform. I'm assuming means the entire libertarian platform without reservation. And I want to add to that, I saw a little circle when you picked up the one you had, and I was wondering what you had circled there.
Oh, but I just the Libertarian Party writes in here that the circle right here is the first line of principles. We, the members of the Libertarian Party, challenge the cult of the omnipotent state. So sometimes when I'm running for president, I feel like I'm part of a cult, and I don't like that feeling. I want to be part of a political organization. I don't want to be part of a cult, because if you are part of a cult, by definition, you're just chanting cliches. You're chanting conclusory statements, and you haven't done the work. Members of a cult are individuals who defer to some omnipotent leader and check their brains at the door, and I don't want to be that guy.
So on the question of, do you support the entire libertarian platform without reservation, your answer on that?
I do, especially the line that says the Constitution shall not be suspended even during times of war. So that line speaks to me more than any other line in the platform. What you don't get to do with regard to a platform, so you can debate different points in a platform and so forth, but what you don't get to do as a presidential candidate, I think, is just take one line and run with that and build a cult following around that line. For instance, we aspire to see people of the world free in our lifetime. That's a very nice aspiration, but it's just that. It's an aspiration. It doesn't get people elected. What gets people elected is leveraging the framework and the power tools that we, the people, created for ourselves so that we can assert the full authority of our citizenship. I say that I'm running for president to return authority to the highest office in the land, which is the office of citizen. And that's why I say all citizens should be allowed to vote. We have 25 million citizens in this country who share my disability. I have a 30-year-old felony conviction. I've been fortunate to live in Vermont and California where I can vote, but all citizens should be able to vote, whether they're in prison or not. There should be no test. Prisoners carry into the cage with them the title of citizen. And what better way to say, we're looking forward to having you back in society, civically engaged, leaning fully into your authority of citizen. We want your vote, especially because you know what it's like to live the entire Bill of Rights. Those of us who live out here, all we know is the First and Second Amendment. So we need your vote as the most informed vote in the ballot booth.
All right. And Jeff had another question. He asked, do you have a position on the separation of church and state?
Yeah, I actually call it the separation of state from church, which is actually what it is. It's not the separation of church and state. Church is not a factor in the First Amendment. The First Amendment commands the president, the legislature, and federal judges to ensure that the state is separated from church. So therefore, because of that principle, which is rock solid and unambiguous, any citizen can go to any church or no church or make up their own God and start their own religion. And so I support that, unlike the Reverend Pence, who believes he was put here on the planet to install a world religion that coincidentally just happens to be exactly what he believes in.
and I don't know if Jeff was going there with this, but this is a common question.
Mm-hmm.
What about the tax exempt status of churches?
I support that, but that is part of the keeping the state out of church. So I support that. Of course, if there was no IRS, we wouldn't even have to ask that question.
Okay. Because it seems to be there's a lot of discussion lately on removing that. And particularly in the Libertarian Party, which surprises me.
That's not a conversation libertarians should be having, because implicit in if libertarians are arguing that churches should not be tax exempt, what libertarians are arguing is to give IRS more power than it already has. I want to get rid of the 16th Amendment, get rid of the IRS, not make it more powerful. And I do not want to see the 16th Amendment, which I support the repeal of, to get commingled with First Amendment principles and start watering down the principles in the First Amendment, which are still pretty rock solid. So let's keep the First Amendment unambiguous, keep it out of religion as it's written, and not take this perfect 46 words, the First Amendment, the most studied 46 words in human history. Let's not muddy it up by commingling the 16th Amendment with it, of all things. Oh my God, I need to just
haven't
take a
we
drink.
already, though, when you're forbidding pastors or other spiritual leaders from engaging in political persuasion from the pulpit?
Well, the operative word there is from the pulpit, and I'm not aware that pastors are being hauled off and thrown in a cage for doing that. But what they do, if we were having this conversation in a church and I was a pastor and there are 100 people coming down to hear a church service, and let's say I'm one of these unambiguous for-profit pastors that is really just there to, you know, just doing it for the money. We know who these people are, right?
Oh, we do, yes.
Right. So let's say you're Jimmy Swaggart, right? And you're going off on some political tangent because, I don't know, maybe you hate Obama, whatever it is, right? Well, you're putting all he's doing there is putting him status at risk. So there are many other venues where Jimmy Swaggart can stand up as a citizen. In fact, almost any other venue, any other public venue, but not in that particular venue where I support the principle of even the Jimmy Swaggarts of the world not having to pay taxes, because I don't want to get involved in this pissing contest of a test of what is a real religion, what is not a real religion, who's a real pastor, who's a priest, who, Episcopal, get into all. We don't have diffuse religions fighting in the street in the United States because of the unambiguous nature of the First Amendment. We don't have Muslims fighting Jews. We don't have Catholics fighting Protestants. We engage in rhetoric. We disagree. It's peaceful. It works.
Okay, one more. I'm not to go down the church rabbit hole, but doesn't saying what the pastor can say from the pulpit limit the First Amendment? And it is the state telling the church, well, you can say pretty much anything you want, but you can't say that. And that presumes that the principles that are in someone's faith do not act out in real life. Real life is politics and do not have implications for the political decisions that they'll make. So I was just curious as to your position on that, because it seems to me that is an interference of the state. And it's almost like a bribe. Hey, we'll let you guys have this little treat as long as you don't do this thing. And the whole thing seems to me highly improper.
Well, it's a choice that, say, a Jimmy Swaggart makes. So there's nothing to stop a Jimmy Swaggart from having a for-profit church. But he makes the choice to submit the application to be tax exempt. So when he makes that choice, he understands, excuse me, he understands that there's one venue where he has to walk a fine line when it comes to his political speech, and that is when he's standing up there in the pulpit. It doesn't censor him completely. The federal government actually, I sound like such an establishment guy sometimes, but the federal government has really kept its hands off, in a large extent, nonprofit organizations and churches because of the First Amendment. But this is a choice Jimmy Swaggart makes. Again, there's no law against having a for-profit religion. You can do that. But when you seek to have your religion subsidized by the taxpayers, that's the contract you sign. If you don't like that, you can get a clipboard. Article 5 provides 5 ways to amend the Constitution. You can even amend the way we amend the Constitution. We can do whatever we want. It all depends how motivated you are and how much pain you feel you're in.
I have to pick at this a little bit because I just see a little bit of an inconsistency, and that's okay.
There is. I would stipulate to that there is, okay. Because what you have defined is competing interests, and this is the source of litigation and political argument, is when you have two constitutional principles that are in conflict: freedom of religion and freedom of speech. Those are the principles that are in conflict that we're discussing here.
I don't think they're in conflict. I think the state created an artificial conflict.
Well, the Constitution created the framework for that conflict when the 16th Amendment was ratified, which, again, I support the repeal of that amendment. And if it wasn't for that amendment, we wouldn't even be having this conversation because there would be no tax-exempt churches.
Okay. But I'm going to give you some food for thought.
Right.
And Aya had asked me, why am I focusing just on churches when the same issue exists for other nonprofits? And the reason was because of Jeff's question of church and state. So we were already on the subject of churches. But I would agree with you, Aya. I have the same problem with that for other nonprofits.
Right.
So it's not just for churches. So I just want to tell you,
the people who benefit from these nonprofits. I had a business partner back in New Hampshire, and we built a seminar company in the mid '90s. It was very successful. Actually, a company recruiting candidates. How about that, huh? It was in the private sector, though. But the company became successful, and his wife had been adopted, so they had 2 or 3 children that wanted to adopt children. So he formed a nonprofit, and he turned her adopting children into a tax write-off for his for-profit business. And she traveled around the world and ultimately adopted 7 children. But the nonprofit organization was a sham. It gave him window dressing for his for-profit business to show what a good guy he is. But in fact, what he was doing was using his economic privilege to take advantage of a law that allowed him to get a big write-off so his wife could go out and do what she was going to do anyway and adopt children. So there's a tremendous amount of abuse in these areas, and repealing the 16th Amendment and solves all of these problems. So I agree with you that there are multiple truths associated with all of this stuff. The solution is get rid of the 16th Amendment, save the sandbox. If you want to adopt children, go adopt children. Don't pretend you're doing it because you're some person that's more virtuous than I am. Just go adopt your kids and shut up about it.
Okay, here's the thing I wanted to give you that was food for thought. Because I could be wrong on, and you can correct me afterwards. And I'd learn more as I discuss your positions more.
There are no bad ideas. They're all good ideas.
It seems like you come to your particular philosophy from a utilitarian background where the 16th Amendment way of raising money is more trouble than it's worth, that it causes more problems than it allegedly solves by providing government funding. I come at my opposition to the 16th Amendment on the idea that tax is coercive taking, therefore theft.
Yes.
So
I had a debate with Dan Berman the other night, and I'll just interject this. You have to finish the thought in order to accurately define what it is we're talking about. Taxation is theft made legal.
Correct. But I'm dealing not in the context of law. I'm dealing just in the context of philosophical morals. So I think taxation.
I don't know how you separate the two. If we are citizens and all rights are natural and all authority comes from the citizens, by definition, we're also talking about the law.
No, because I could have the same conversation with the same truths no matter what country I'm in, because I'm not making this grounded in any country. Wherever such a thing
Right.
happened, it's theft.
Okay, that's where you and I are different, because I'm a citizen of the United States and I don't really give a shit what the tax policy is in France or what the philosophy is in France. I have to operate here. I have to build my business here. I have to exercise my authority as a citizen here. So I am squarely focused right here.
Understood, as am I. And I don't think the two are mutually exclusive,
They're
but
not.
I just wanted to, the one trail that I just wanted you to, maybe food for thought, is if the opposition to taxation of the income tax, I'm opposed to all taxation, but right now and so is the Libertarian Party, by the way,
Right.
but the income tax is the immediate doable goal. So if the income tax taxation is theft, then people who you talked about using subsidies and people, being able to adopt children by finding loopholes, to me, I say good for them. If someone could escape theft, good for them.
I agree with that.
Okay.
I agree with that. What I'm arguing is that if we didn't have a 16th Amendment, we wouldn't have to be debating whether people were being disingenuous or not. One of the things I've learned as someone who came from, my story is sort of rags to riches to rags to riches. And one of the things I've learned is that you start to build net worth. You start to learn all of the advantages that are built into our system for people that attain a certain economic status. And I oppose that. I'm a level playing field guy. I agree with you. I champion people who use the system that's in place to get the most benefit that they can. And for the same reason, I think that we both oppose the 16th Amendment. But I would prefer that we not have a 16th Amendment in place, which creates a caste system in the United States, which is philosophically unconstitutional, because a citizen is a citizen. Our system does not have a test for your net worth or your intellectual capacity or your gender or your race or your sexual preference or any of that. It's blind to all of that. And that's one of the reasons I'm so opposed to the 16th Amendment, so that we don't have to have even philosophy around this topic. We wouldn't have to have philosophy around it. We would just be going about our business, and we would understand. Everyone, I think most people would agree that there are legitimate purposes for government. Within the libertarian bubble, there is a percentage of people who disagree with that. But if you go outside the libertarian bubble and you start talking about anarchy or rolling up the United States, that is the most extreme act of political marginalization that you can commit, way worse than what I did in Florida.
Well, just full disclosure, I'm an anarchist, if you didn't know. I don't
So
want that to be the elephant in the room.
So I share the philosophy, but it's just that. It's not a thing, and it's not part of the Libertarian Party platform. Our platform states foursquare, the Constitution shall not be suspended even in wartime. So if you are an anarchist and you're running for president, you're literally using this platform to destroy the Libertarian Party, because without the First Amendment, which gets repealed in an anarchist society, there is no Libertarian Party. So my question is, have you thought this through?
Oh, I really have. And I want to give you fair warning.
Right.
I'm the party historian on the platform.
Right.
This might not be an area you want to debate me on, but that's fine.
All that we can debate is the text. The rest of it doesn't matter. Has nothing to do with anything. The text is what drives the argument.
Certainly. And I'm going to quote to you some text.
Okay.
The Libertarian Party platform is transitional. It says things that are doable within the realities that we have today. The reality today is that we have certain protections under the Constitution. But if you look at our bylaws, it says that the Libertarian Party is founded upon the statement of principles, not upon the platform. And the statement of principles makes government optional. And that was done on purpose in 1974 in order to make minarchists and anarchists completely welcome within the party.
Yeah.
The
So
party
the Libertarian
itself,
Party didn't make government optional. Government is optional. The bylaws that the Libertarian Party rests on and the Constitution, they're just bylaws, and they evolve, as you say, and they're transitional by definition. So the Libertarian Party's organizational bylaws and the platform are no different from any other organization in that regard.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Whitney, but
you can tell yourself that story. But
okay,
all organizations evolve, and they are all transitional by definition, and that's why executives come and go, people come and go.
Mark,
so yeah.
What's the threshold to amend the statement of principles?
The threshold, I don't know. I'd have to look at the bylaws to tell you that,
because that would tell you the chances of it changing.
That is common in all organizations. Right. It's very difficult to amend the foundation. So if the members of a foundation are not able to get critical mass, it's often 2/3 or 75% to do that, then guess what they do? They start a competing organization. They start their own party, and then that party competes, and both parties end up better for it.
Of course.
So what?
But just an FYI, the statement of principles is, for all intents and purposes, impossible to change. Theoretically, it's possible, just like it was theoretically possible that Jim Carrey could have dated the pretty girl in Dumb and Dumber because she said they had a 1 in a million chance.
There's a chance.
Right. It is 7/8 of registered delegates at convention, not 7/8 of those voting on the floor. It's 7/8 of all registered delegates. There isn't even 7/8 of registered delegates ever.
So what is your point in pointing that out?
Well, my point in pointing that out is that you had said that I was at odds with the platform. And I would never say that you're at odds with the platform.
Right. But I am saying that.
Well, you are incorrect. And but that's okay. You can think that. I was just letting you know that.
So let's just in the real world. What is the precedent in a political world where you're trying to, this is a political organization we have here that's founded for the purpose of electing and defeating candidates. 48-year history of not electing candidates. So what exactly is the point?
Okay, I would also say you somewhat misstated the purpose. The purpose is also stated in our bylaws. And electing candidates and running candidates is part of the purpose, but it's not the entire purpose. And the founders of the party, several of whom were anarchists themselves, such as Roy Childs, stated that it was both educational and political because they believed that politics was a lagging indicator of social change that had already taken place.
Right.
There were a lot of different reasons.
So I think by definition, whenever you're involved in a political organization, you are by definition also involved in education, persuasion, rhetoric, all the things that come with that. But I am, look, I've been a chief executive for 20 years. I'm a transactional guy. I'm interested in having a party that does everything you're saying, but also gets people elected, because we have two criminal organizations, the Republican and Democratic National Committee, that have taken over this country and made the Bill of Rights unrecognizable and actually provided, incubated a market for people under 40 to say, burn the whole thing down. And I'm here to remind people the power they have as citizens, as someone with a high school education, who defeated the largest law firm in the world, the Department of Justice, 3 times, talked the IRS down from $1 million to $20,000, used his First Amendment rights to sue a president. And I believe that we need to be more courageous as citizens. But when I even talk about a constitutional convention to libertarians, they say they don't want to do that because they're afraid they're going to lose their Second Amendment rights. So all the things that we're complaining about, libertarians aren't even courageous enough to take it on. They'd rather just have their guns and not have anything else.
Well, everyone has I'm a pacifist, believe it or not. I fully support your right to own guns, and I'm pretty vociferous about it, but I'm not a gun nut myself.
Right.
And I don't say that in an insulting way. I say
I
that in a
understand.
loving way. I love my gun nut loving libertarians. But I wanted to answer an implied question you had said about the party's 48-year history. And the insinuation was that perhaps some impractical ideas were why we haven't had success up until now.
You think?
No, I don't think.
Okay.
The reason that we haven't, as a lay historian of the party, is that the party has always had two minds. One, which was scared, and I'm going to get now a little spicy myself.
All right.
One mind of people who would rather piss their pants rather than say any truly libertarian thing, and others that were very hardcore. And you can't do both. They keep canceling each other out. If we had consistently stuck with the pure statement of principles from the beginning, this world would be drastically different. But we've been schizophrenic, and we continue to be schizophrenic, as you see in some of the candidates that have been put forth.
Yeah, I think also the
Bill
Democrat,
Weld, hello.
I'm with you on that. I think that when you take the opportunity that every 4 years presents to nominate a certified pre-owned Republican to represent your party, what you're doing is saying, we take throwaways from your party because we don't have anybody better here. And that is a terrible message to send. And that's one of the reasons this party does not have credibility in the mainstream media. It's shot itself in the foot the last 3 cycles, which is the last 12 years. And I'll just tell you, and I don't think I've said this yet, one of the reasons I decided to get in this race was because I saw Lincoln Chafee sniffing around, who seems to be a perfectly nice guy.
Well, he's a doll.
You can't look. I have a scorched earth point of view with regard to these two criminal organizations that have just put a second steering wheel over these fundamental principles in the First and Second and 14th Amendment and made them unrecognizable. And I can talk for hours at a granular level about the horror show and the fine print of Title 18, the U.S. Criminal Code, and the Tax Code, and all of these things, and tell stories that would absolutely horrify people. And I'm here who you are. If you're Lincoln Chafee or Justin Amash or any of those people, I also don't have a test for good and bad Republicans or Democrats. If you're part of that organization and you've been elected more than once by that organization and you didn't get the point, I want nothing. I just want to destroy you.
You and I probably think very similarly on that point. I'm not a fan of the Republican retreads. I think we lift our skirts for, any handsome stranger that comes by and winks.
They're not Republican retreads. They're thieves. There's a pot of gold that comes in when you get this nomination as president.
Right. Our ballot access.
There are millions of dollars that come in. The first thing I did before I ran was read all 227 pages of the Federal Election Commission rules and regulations and laws. And it won't come as any surprise to you that the system the Democrats have set up and Republicans have set up for themselves with regard to how donations are handled are very porous. And what Gary Johnson did was launder that money out through consultants, and Justin Amash would do the same. He'd launder it right through his brothers who run his family business, which is getting elected to office. Justin Amash has never had a job in the private sector. Libertarians worship the guy. He's a piece of shit Republican is what he is.
He's not a libertarian, so I don't even talk, theoreticals.
He's a Republican.
He's a Republican.
You can say nothing worse.
Right now.
The worst thing you can say about any fellow citizen is that they are a Republican or Democrat. There is no greater insult.
I don't disagree. And we don't disagree on that. There is another question, but I'm actually going to save that one to the end because I would like to get to the Florida thing. So in California, when I'd seen you speak, you were perfect gentleman. Well, as a libertarian gentleman, that you're always a little saucy around the edges. And when I saw you in Florida, when I asked you, okay, we can get honest with each other here. When I asked you, did you have a stroke? I wasn't joking, because it was a different person, an entirely different person. And I feel that the way you went after the Libertarian Party of Florida was horrible.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I'd like to have a
you know what?
discussion on that.
If I feel like you are violating my constitutional rights, I get really impractical and I get really ugly. And that's exactly who you want in a libertarian presidential nominee. It's exactly what you want. So there are multiple layers to what happened in Florida. So I'll just start with California. In California, I was very excited after my first real big legitimate debate in a legitimate venue with a big audience. I felt I did great in the California debate. And when I got off stage, Jacob and Adam and Vermin, Jacob and Adam in particular always have a lot of supporters. Jacob is libertarian famous. He brought people in from Arizona. Adam's got a big internet following. And so I came in fifth after that debate. It didn't faze me. It was a big win for Whitney 2020 that weekend. We pulled number 3 with tokens. I came in fifth in the debate. And I had a moment during the candidate introductions where I had a chance to go after Lincoln and got a big round of applause and a big laugh. So it was a big win. You know what? My team didn't agree. My team took me off of the room and they were panicked. And they said, we got 90 days to go. You've got a bad name recognition problem. And we got to do something to turn this around because you came in fifth. I was happy up until that point. So after that meeting, I made a unilateral, I said to myself, all on my own, not involving my team, because I know how to get attention if I need to. I said, okay, well, the next time I do an interview, I'm going to call St. Jacob a motherfucker. And that'll solve the name recognition problem, which I did. I did it in an interview, not on a debate stage. I did it in an interview with an independent libertarian publication from Texas. Well. Didn't that bring out the authoritarians? My campaign team suddenly starts getting texts going, control your candidate. Control your candidate. Suddenly, everybody is an authoritarian. And the systems that we have in place that turn presidential candidates in this party into robots so that the state conventions, we all stand there one after the other, mindlessly chanting principles. And we go like this. Doesn't matter what the question is. We go, get rid of that. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. And we all say it 11 times and you'll learn nothing about us. So in the wake of that, within 24 hours of that, my campaign manager was contacted by the people putting the convention on in Florida. And they said, and this is not something all candidates were briefed on. This was a Whitney rule that said, if Mark doesn't agree not to say bad words, nobody gave me a list of what the words were. I'm not meant to say, because we could argue forever on what bad words are. Forget about bad context. Then we're not going to put the live stream out. So I immediately agreed to not use bad words. The night before the Florida convention, the Friday night before, there was an open mic that was a comedy club environment that you would expect to see at 10 o'clock at the Gotham Comedy Club in New York City. It was raw. It was beyond R-rated, and everybody was fine with that, except probably some people in the audience were offended, but most people are having a good time. I come from a background of owning a comedy club myself. I owned the only uncensored comedy club in Southern California. If you recall Michael Richards years ago, he got up on stage at the Laugh Factory and he got banished from the kingdom for saying the N-word several times when he went off on some hecklers. Michael Richards would have been invited back to my comedy club the next day.
You know, Cosmo?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was trying to place the name
Cosmo
there. Okay.
Kramer. Yeah, Cosmo Kramer. So Michael Richards would have been invited back to my comedy club the next day. In fact, the local ABC station here in San Diego interviewed me the next day, and they wanted me to condemn Kramer, and I refused to do it. And they never aired the story. They wanted me to condemn his language, and I stood up for. Comedy clubs that's where the First Amendment lives. That's where people go to figure out all the big ideas that we love to hear. And stand-up comedy starts below the waist and it stays there for a couple of years. And then it moves to the heart and then it moves to the head, and you end up with a Dave Chappelle who uses a lot of bad language, and a lot of people can't watch him for that reason. So what I learned coming out of Florida, if I had Florida to do over again, I would do it differently because I understand the culture of the party better. I'm disappointed in the culture of the party that there are these control mechanisms in place over presidential candidates that are not written down. It's just a culture that has evolved over 48 years. Control your candidate. Turn your candidate into a potted plant. Don't let your candidate show who he or she is on stage. So what you saw in Florida was multiple things. I was objecting as a citizen to what I felt was a violation of my right to engage in unfettered political speech and let the end user of the debate decide what they thought about my verbal and nonverbal choices. I objected to that. I only wanted to be able to choose the words. I don't want some moderator imposing their sensibilities on the body politic. I want the body politic, the citizens, to be able to decide.
Okay, I've got some follow-ups now. Okay.
Okay, but the other thing, the last thing is, I think it's a bad look for any political organization, particularly the Libertarian Party, to engage in censorship of political speech. Laws and other arguments aside, it's stupid.
There are some points on which we agree, but more points on which we disagree.
Great. Let's talk about those. The others are boring.
I want to talk about the ones we agree on first in principle.
Okay.
I see a disturbing movement, even within the Libertarian Party, but within culture in general, that it's the whole starting to label speech as other things. Like, this is hate speech. No, it's free speech.
Huge problem.
And
this platform we're on right now is regulated by European judicial opinions that construe hate speech, which is a thing in Europe. It's not a thing here.
Right. Well, it's becoming a thing here. I couldn't get an anti-hate speech platform plank passed on the Libertarian. I was platform committee chair in 2018, and it died in flames.
It doesn't surprise me.
It surprised me. Maybe it shouldn't have been. So I actually. Okay, I'm going to give an analogy. There's a lot of libertarians that are very self-consciously libertarian-like. They'll be like, legalize all drugs, but drugs are bad, okay? Now, me, I'm a little bit different. I tend to think that people have taken drugs for millennia and they're going to continue to, and there's ways to do it responsibly. I don't feel this compulsive need to virtue signal by saying, adding but drugs are bad, okay? No, just legalize all drugs.
I'm with you on that.
Okay.
So, abuse of any kind is an opportunity for self-discovery and growth. So knock yourself out on the drug abuse.
I've known functional hard drug users. It is possible.
I lived with 900 of them.
Yeah, I don't want that life, but
right.
I don't feel the need to go, but drugs are bad, okay? There's no worse than alcohol, most of them. And nobody feels the need to walk around going, but whatever, you get my point. But the same thing is with speech. We claim to believe in free speech, but we don't see any value to bad speech. And I actually think there's an inherent value to bad speech because it keeps speech free.
Yeah, the more speech, the better. It's not, I don't even have a test for good and bad. I just want more. I
definitely have a test.
Yeah, I don't.
I get in trouble for defending the free speech rights of the unlikable all the time.
If you're a school teacher right now in these here United States and you post a political opinion that is off center on Facebook, you're at risk of losing your job.
Yeah. The ACLU used to do that, but they don't anymore. So I actually see a value in letting bad people talk, because when you take away words, all that's left is violence.
Absolutely. And you have to, it's not just, it's if people that say, this came up in my debate with Brian Ellison the other night, the presidential debate, Brian brings up Nazis, and I'm like, if that Nazi is saying hateful, vile things and it's peaceful, and I'm a lawyer, that's the first person I want to defend, because that is going to ensure that the Libertarian Party exists without any challenges. That's
The
why you
funny
do
thing
it.
is, that's why Brian Ellison's running against me for secretary, is because of that. I do not believe words get violence. I do not believe in the punch a Nazi mentality.
Yeah. More speech makes everything better.
And apparently that now makes me a Nazi. I guess I'm quite unusual. I got to learn my goose step, I guess. I don't know if any pacifists are Nazis.
Do they even have pink Nazis?
I don't think they have pink pacifist,
No, I don't
Nazis,
think so.
Christian,
Yeah.
but whatever. Okay, so there's where we agree on the. I'm a free speech purist.
Right.
I don't.
Same
Okay.
here. Obviously, right? I set myself on fire in a room of 200 people.
But see, I don't think that was exercising free speech purity, and this is where we disagree.
Okay.
Now, in talking about inherent, and one chupacabra I want to eliminate, because people, I don't like shallow thinking. And when I bring up free speech purity, people go, ooh, but you can't call fire in a crowded theater. You can if there's a fire.
Absolutely. You can't, they quote it wrong. You can't falsely call fire in a crowded theater.
And it's
That's
not because
the
speech is bad. It's because you committed fraud.
Well, you are inciting violence. And that's not peaceful. The operative term in the First Amendment is peace. Has to be peaceful.
Right. But I mean, there's sometimes some vacuous arguments that just really drive me batty.
Right.
Okay. Now with Florida, though, they are a private organization, and they have every right to set whatever rules that they want. We do have free speech, but we also strongly believe in private property.
Correct. So there you have, again, a conflict of principles that are fundamental. So I have argued this, and I've had nice conversations with the chairman of the Florida Libertarian Party. I've been on Davy Parrish's podcast since, and but this has been my argument, and I disagree with Jacob Hornberger. So Jacob basically made the argument that a public forum where all the speakers are presidential candidates, and the purpose of it is for people to decide who they want to vote for. He basically argued that it's just like your living room. Well, I disagree. The Libertarian Party of Florida has, to call back, is subsidized by taxpayers for the purpose of putting on political forums like this so voters can make decisions, exercise their authority as citizens. So if there was litigation and we went before a panel of libertarian judges, where do you think they would come down? You think they would come down on the right of citizens to hear the forum and make the decisions for themselves based
not on someone else's property?
Everything is held on somebody else's property. Everything.
Correct.
Everything.
Correct.
So you're saying it's the same as somebody's living room.
Well, living room has different connotations. Of somebody's home, there's different rules of decorum.
You're saying it's the same as somebody's private organization. You're saying it's the same as my office here at the LawNet.
It is.
And the LawNet is not subsidized by taxpayers for the purpose of putting on political forums to elect or defeat candidates. The Florida Libertarian Party exists for that purpose.
Okay, well, I'm going to have
conceptually distinct.
It actually isn't. Does LawNet exist on the internet?
The law.net.
Yes. The internet was originally formed, as a defense system.
Okay,
wait
a minute. Time out. This is going down a rabbit hole. The LawNet was not formed.
All of us are subsidized. All of us.
No. Okay. The Florida Libertarian Party has special subsidies that are provided by taxpayers, as we just discussed earlier today.
No, we actually didn't.
Come on, we did. We talked about nonprofit organizations.
Yeah, they have restrictions. They don't have, what are their subsidies? I'm really dying to hear them.
They don't pay taxes on the money they collect. They don't pay taxes on the money they collect because they exist for a public purpose of electing or defeating candidates. This is not an intellectual leap here. It's the fact that you're disagreeing shows the strength of my argument.
No, actually, it doesn't. So Trump should be able to come in and take over the Libertarian Party convention?
Trump is free to become a libertarian if he wants to. And
why
does he have
to become a libertarian to do that?
Because the Libertarian Party is the Libertarian National Party is also an organization formed pursuant to certain laws. It has a platform, it has a set of bylaws, and we all have to comply by that. I can be
That's
voted
very
out.
authoritarian of you, though.
It is not authoritarian.
Yes, it is under your own logic.
I'm not endorsing it. I'm stating a fact that the Libertarian Party is an organization that is subsidized by taxpayers for political reasons. What is so hard about that? That's a fact.
We are all subsidized in some way. The government has made it impossible not to be.
In some way. It just so happens that our organization is subsidized for the purpose of putting on political forums so we can exercise self-government.
That is actually not the purpose.
So fundamental as to not even require discussion.
Okay, so because they're there to, could you have just in the middle of Chair Nakala's bylaws debate or whatever item of business, just got up there and start talking? I mean, they're subsidized by the state, and you can
That's a question that you ask when you have cognitive dissonance and you're unable to respond to my point.
And when somebody
you go right to the red herring, right? It's what people do with abortion. So would you allow abortion the day before the baby was meant to be born? It's that kind of question. That means I won the argument.
And when you don't answer the question, I think that is appealing to fallacy.
You know what? I answer questions that are asked in good faith. That's a question that's intended to marginalize me as someone who is standing up for a basic principle of unfettered political speech, which if this party doesn't stand for that, you know what? Y'all just take this and do that right there.
We stand for private property as well. You do not.
I acknowledge that we have two fundamental principles in conflict.
They're not in conflict.
And I'm arguing they are in conflict unless you mindlessly say that all venues are the same and exist for the same purpose, which everybody listening to this knows is not true.
They do. And that's why when you go to a certain thing, certain things are expected. Each event has its own expectations.
Excuse me. My expectations of a libertarian presidential debate is that it should be uncensored. That's my expectation. That's my expectation. I made that expectation known in Florida. That is still my expectation. If I was producing it, that would be the way it would be. But I wasn't producing it. The Libertarian Party of Florida was producing it. And and you are asserting on their behalf the right to do what they did. And I'm saying if there was litigation, a libertarian federal judge would take my side. I believe that's true. I believe that it violates the 9th Amendment right to representation on the part of citizens. That would be my argument. I've studied this crap for hundreds of hours, and I believe I would win, and I would litigate it all the way to Supreme Court, and I would spend $500,000 to do it.
That's very nice. I see we're having a measuring contest now. I'm a paralegal, been a paralegal for 20 years. I know the laws well.
What I'm doing, so does every judge and everyone in Congress. Are all lawyers, and they all claim to know the law. And what we do with the law is we argue, we assert ourselves, we make our best argument pursuant to the First Amendment. When we disagree, we access the courts, and it lands where it lands. And I am asserting, based on someone who has personally beat the Department of Justice 3 times on appeal, citing the Constitution, that I would win that argument, just like I'm winning it here today.
Can I tell you that usually the person who has to say they won doesn't usually, that is an indicator usually that they haven't, but this isn't a debate.
You're entitled to your opinion, and it is a debate.
Oh, no, I don't debate anymore.
Well, we disagree, and we're arguing. What do you call it?
I call it a discussion because they're
okay. Well, it's also a discussion.
That's
a debate is within the umbrella of discussion.
Okay, I'm not going to argue semantics. I can say though that I have not insulted you yet once, and you've resulted to insult, and that's okay. I
haven't insulted you. I'm having a principled disagreement, like I did in Florida. Okay, I have much higher expectations of the Libertarian Party than it has for itself.
You don't see that that's an ad hominem, and you don't see that when I ask a question, you immediately accuse me of bad faith, and it wasn't in bad faith. I can tell you it wasn't in bad faith.
It's a category of questions that people ask. You know, when you go to the red herring question, when you go to the farthest extreme, I don't believe
it's a red herring, though.
It is. Look, all property is the same. Is that what you want me to stipulate to? I'm not going to do that.
I didn't say all property was the same, but I do.
You recognize the difference in the venue. You recognize the difference when we talk about pastors in churches. You understood the difference in venues then.
So there is, now we're getting somewhere. So you agree then, because there's a certain expectation at that certain agenda time that there's going to be platform debate or bylaws debate, and it would be inappropriate for you to get up at the mic and interrupt the proceedings. We agree.
Yeah, who? But that's not none of that happened in Florida.
You're correct, but it's what follows from your argument.
I took the stage when it was my turn to take the stage, and I participated as a candidate throughout the entire debate, just like the other candidates. I just had different answers to the questions.
Okay, I want to step back.
Bring it on, authoritarians was one of my answers.
It was. I want to step back and take a breather, because I don't feel any hostility towards you, and I don't want this to be hostile.
I don't feel hostility toward you either.
Okay, I just want to make sure, because
I'm doing business here.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because to me, I'm going to give you the sappy woman thing.
It wasn't personal in Florida either. I was up there doing business. And by the way, as I was doing it, I did see an opportunity in being the only candidate who stood up for uncensored political speech. That is the right position to take. All other things aside, as a libertarian presidential nominee, if you don't stand for that, you stand for nothing.
In a forum, though, that someone else is providing, they also put time limits. They have a moderator that you have to accept or not be there.
Correct.
So I do not believe,
and those rules apply to all the candidates,
right?
But only I was taken aside to have my speech regulated,
because you're the only one who had a past history of doing things like
not
that.
Not in debates. So here's what the problem is. Okay. And one of the problems I have in this campaign is I am very comfortable on my feet, and that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Okay. Because this party's comfort level is not even close to where it needs to be as an organization to be politically viable. Its comfort level is like 10% of what it needs to be. Okay. I know how to win things. I know how to succeed, and I know how to lead an audience with confidence.
You didn't lead the audience in Florida.
Right. So that was one bad night. You get to do another show the next day. I slept like a baby that night. Everybody else was all upset.
I know, but I'm just saying.
Good, you know?
There's a point now, I think I'd agree with you. If you were the only candidate singled out for informing of a speech code, that was wrong.
Of course. Especially after you've paid the money to go to Florida.
Yeah,
my son traveled 3,000 miles from Oregon to join me, and my autistic son, he was traumatized for a week after that. And I know that I'm doing that to him when I'm up there on stage, but I feel so strongly about the principle of unfettered, uncensored political speech, regardless of any other arguments. We should be leading on this as a party, and Florida didn't lead that night, and we're still not leading on it. We're wrong not to be leading on that.
Well, I don't think allowing listen, it can be subjective as to what's naughty words, but there are some that are clearly on one side of the bridge, and motherfucker is one of those words,
right? Which I use not in a debate, and I use that word exactly because it is so incendiary.
Of course,
it was an act of civil disobedience to stir up a bunch of attention.
I get it.
And it worked.
I wasn't there on Friday, so I have no opinion about what happened. And if it's as you described, open mic, whatever, I don't care about that.
Right. Okay. But if we're not leading, if we're not leading as a party on everything that has to do with the First Amendment, what are we doing? What are we doing?
Setting a speech code for something that is going to be put out at the party's expense, I don't think is a violation of your First Amendment rights.
Okay, fine. So all of that aside, why is it not the better decision to just let candidates choose their words, choose their props, and it lands where it lands? Why is everybody clutching their pearls?
Now, that's a different question. Now, that is a different question. If it were my choice, I would probably do that, because it's the Streisand effect. And I think we saw that because you admitted that you acted out a bit because you felt like you were being chafed.
Yeah, I said I'm going to go in and I'm going to tell people that I am here under protest. And I did that in my opening statement, and people sat on their hands. And I said to myself, okay, the rest of this night is going to be an act of civil disobedience. That's what I said to myself. That's what I did. And it was détente. They were unmovable. I was unmovable. We agree to disagree, and life goes on.
Wisdom is the better part of valor, is a saying. And Florida has, 60 to 70 delegates.
Right.
I just don't think that was the best decision on your
There are
part.
more important things than winning the nomination of this party, because as it stands right now, unless I am the nominee, it will be a non-event, as it is every 4 years. You'll get courtesy treatment from the media. If Jacob Hornberger is the nominee, the lights after Austin will be on for about 4 hours, and then they will turn to other things. I have a great libertarian story that the journalists at the Wall Street traded media will look at my story, and they'll be thinking Pulitzer Prize. And if I can get on the late night shows and do 5 minutes of Chappelle level stand up on Kimmel, I'll be on every show. I might get to host SNL, and it's possible that $100 million comes in. It's possible to get on the debate stage, but we're going to nominate some boring guy that chants principles and gives freedom a bad name. Knock yourself out with that.
One last thing on Florida, and you take this for whatever it's worth. You do not have to take my kind suggestion, but I really do think you owe the Convention Planning Committee of Florida an apology.
I apologize to Florida on Davey Parrish podcast.
Okay, I didn't hear it, so I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear it. So other people probably didn't hear it. So hopefully those people would hear it now. I've been on a convention committee, and oh my God, is it thankless work. And by the time you get to convention, you are so drained that to have a pile on like that just feels really shitty.
I understand. And I'm sure that it was very disillusioning for them having to plan this grand event and have that happen. I'm sure that was a problem. But, the context that I apologize in, it wasn't a non-apology apology. It was a sincere apology. And if I had to do over again, I would make my objection differently based on the insight that I have into the culture of the audience. Getting up on stage and being 110% myself in the moment has always served me very well. Being a human battering ram when the feds were trying to take me down 30 years ago has always served me well. Competing with an entrenched duopoly in the legal research industry, which is what I've been competing with for 20 years, and doing it very hardcore has always served me well. I would think, to be honest with you, I don't understand why this nomination is not over. I don't understand why the Libertarian Party doesn't want a human battering ram like me to represent this party against these two mafia organizations that have destroyed this country. Why this isn't already over is beyond me, because there's nobody running for president who can do that.
Our convention isn't till the end of August.
I know, but you know what I mean? I'm running from behind. I recognize that. And so I'm doing everything I can to get the nomination. I think Florida was a political setback, but I am glad that I stood up for the principle of uncensored political speech. And I would hope that others in the party would follow. I know many people silently agreed with me in Florida, but, everybody's friends in the room. They got to live with each other on there for 48 hours. So I understand why 100% of the people sat on their hands.
I'm really glad to hear you apologize to the volunteers. That's who my sentiments were with the volunteers who worked hard. I have one more thing to say on Florida. Then we have some follow-up questions, as long as you can stay, because I've kept you longer.
No, I'm good.
Okay. This is just a personal observation. Again, it's what they say. It's like an asshole. Everyone has one. It's my opinion. The one thing that you had said in Florida that really, really rubbed me the wrong way, and it wasn't the cussing. It was
I did not cuss on the debate stage in Florida. Not once.
I misremembered then.
Yeah, not once.
Then I thought you did. So my apologies.
I don't think I did. I go ahead and I'm happy to be fact checked on, but my recollection is that I did not. That it was my goal to actually not do that at all.
I think you did when you were saying how you wouldn't, and you were going to substitute different words. I think you
like
did
Mother
it.
Jacober. That's not a curse.
No, but you said what you were substituting so that people would know. But
that's possible that I may have said a word explaining something that I wasn't meant to say or something like that.
Okay. But that actually, I'm very difficult to offend with stuff like that. That doesn't bother me. The thing that I thought was bad, and I really would hope you don't do again, because I don't think it made you look good,
right,
was when you attacked Jacob Hornberger's career as a lawyer.
Yeah. It's been unconsequential. His Future Freedom Foundation has been a failure. He gives freedom a bad name. He's a guy that wants to come up and tell you what freedom is. He's put a private label on freedom. You know what? Freedom is individual. Liberty is individual. If you feel that you're free, you're free. If you wake up happy every day and you think you're free, then you are. It's not up to Jacob Hornberger to come along and ruin your life.
Okay. I don't share your bad opinion of Mr. Hornberger, but that's fine.
And he's a lawyer, and the lawyers to me represent the establishment. Lawyers put me in a cage unconstitutionally. 2/3 of the stockholders of my company are lawyers. I eat lawyers for lunch. So, Jacob Hornberger is just another failed lawyer to me.
But you didn't let me tell you why, though. I thought the attack was bad.
Right.
Consequences in the eye of the beholder.
Right.
I know some lawyers that you may never have heard of, and they haven't had any famous cases or any glory,
right,
but they're the ones who did pro bono work for some grandma who couldn't write her will. Mm-hmm. So you don't know what non-famous things Jacob may have done that are the high points of his career. Right. So I just thought that was a very reckless statement, because basically what you said, because you don't have these famous cases, you're a failed lawyer.
Right.
And so
let me just respond. I would not go after anybody else on stage except for a lawyer, because lawyers are literally trained to defend themselves. And I would say that Jacob parried my question quite well, and he handed me my ass in response to my attack.
With the reporters, he did.
Yeah, he did. He won that.
Appellate, but most of the audience didn't know that.
No, they didn't know what he was talking about, but he spun it. And he did very well.
I knew it.
You did, because you work as a paralegal for 20 years. But he did a great job parrying that question and fielding that question, which goes to my point. Lawyers can defend themselves. Lawyers are fair game. If you can't go after lawyers, you can't go after anybody.
I just believe there's whatever. I said my point. As
right.
You said,
and I said mine.
Yeah. Well, the best parrier there, though, I thought was Vermin Supreme.
Well, Vermin is always a great parrier with regard to, Vermin performed at the Friday night open mic in Florida. He just did his stage act. And I never seen him as someone who owned a comedy club for 4 or 5 years. I can tell you, he's one of the freest people on stage that you'll ever see. I very much admire his performance talent. I don't know why in a debate after he gets a laugh, he doesn't pivot and directly comment on the issue. I feel like, and I get this too, but I feel like for Vermin, once he gets the laugh, he feels like his work is done. But if he would get the laugh, bring the audience in, and then pivot and have something profound to say directly on the question, he would be a very difficult person to marginalize.
Yeah, he's sharp as a whip.
He is.
Okay, so here's the follow-up questions from people in chat that I want to make sure that I get to. And we talked about the convention, and some people had some convention questions asking your opinion. I'm going to put this up on the screen. I asked, do you think the Libertarian Party National Convention should be held in Austin this year, or should it be held online to maintain social distancing?
Well, my preference would be to have a 3-dimensional convention where we're all in the same room, because whenever we make important decisions in our lives, we do it in the room together, because
belly to belly.
There are all these intangible things that are only perceptible in that sort of environment. If that is not possible because April's been canceled, if May gets canceled, it won't be possible. So I would hope, as somebody who's been trying to get nominated as president, I would hope that the delegates are going to vote on the top 5 people who should be on that debate stage. I hope I'm one of those 5 people, and we all have to just do the best that we can.
FYI, I disagree entirely with the limiting it to 5 candidates.
Yeah, I do too. But I get it. I mean, they want to produce a great debate, and when you have 10 people, there's not really an opportunity for people to answer anything or
Isn't that the
distinguish
same argument
themselves.
made by the debate commission as
I'm
to
not.
why
I'm
that?
not. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
not really making an argument
I
one way
know.
or the other.
I just
But
think we're a bit
I'm
hypocritical.
recognizing the competing interests.
There is.
yeah,
There, I agree.
that's all. Yeah,
But since we argue with the old parties on that very issue, I think we ought to model what we want to see, and we
sure.
don't.
Yeah.
Jeff Adams asked, "How long have you been a big L libertarian?"
Well, I first heard the libertarian the word libertarian in 1982. I was 22. I was working TV in Boston on the 3rd floor with a young Bill O'Reilly, who was a douchebag then. He knew what he wanted to be at a young age. And on the 5th floor, there was a guy named Gene Burns who hosted a 3-hour radio
I know
show.
Gene. Well, I don't know
Gene?
personally, but
So
I
he
know
ran
of
for office
Gene.
as a libertarian for president in 1984. And every day for 3 hours, he unpacked the same question. What is the nature and role of government in a free society? 3 hours a day, 15 hours a week. And at the end of that show, he said, the Gene Burns program is brought to you by a grant from the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. So it sounded like me, 9th grade civics. It still does sound like me, 9th grade civics. I ran for office as a libertarian in 1996 in Vermont. I got 50% more votes in my county race than Harry Brown got in the whole state. I had to call out a large radio station that had received many awards for its political coverage when it tried to exclude me from the 7-way debate with my 3 Democrat and 3 Republican opponents. I convinced them to put me in the debate. I won the debate. I got tons of publicity, even in the Boston Globe. The weekend before the presidential race in 1996, the big article in the Boston Globe was about this unknown libertarian in Vermont getting all the laughs.
Okay, awesome. And here, Aya asks, what was your felony conviction?
I killed a heckler. No, just.
Is that illegal? That shouldn't be illegal.
That's legal in comedy circles. That's why we call it killing. I died on stage in Florida, right? That's called dying on stage. And when you kill, it really is you kill or be killed. And Florida killed me that night. So, you get to go again. You get to fail better the next day. That's kind of, when you've been doing this as long as I have, you fail better next time. It's no big deal. You just dust it off and move on. The question, what was the question again?
She asked what your felony conviction that you mentioned earlier was.
Yeah.
For.
So I gave a couple of tax returns to the bank to get a business loan back in the 80s when I was building Ben & Jerry's stores. And the tax returns accurately reflected what I made those years. I was in my mid-20s, but I hadn't filed them with the IRS because I listened to one of Gene Burns' guests, Irwin Schiff, who was a libertarian presidential candidate in 1996. And after I got convicted for doing that, when I finally arrived at the federal prison camp where I was meant to do my time, the first day at lunch, this guy comes up and sits down with me and introduces himself as the nation's leading authority on the income tax, and it's Irwin Schiff.
Well, that type of felony conviction will generally make you a hero in libertarian circles.
I know, but you know what? In all seriousness, it is fraud. It is fraud because had the bank known that those tax returns weren't filed, they wouldn't have given me the money. So it's literally the definition of fraud, but there is no test as to whether you got the money. The crime, and this is a Class B felony. We get up to 30 years in federal prison. The crime is when you infect the records of the bank so that when the auditors come, they presume the records are true. And when you infect them, that is the felony. It has nothing to do with whether you got the money. My payments were current. I gave them everything I had. I lost 2 homes, 60 acres of land, all my companies, owed IRS $1 million. I mean, I got killed for that lie. That is the day you become not just a large L libertarian, but the entire word in uppercase.
I like that. I like that.
And that is one of my struggles right now as a candidate. I'm too libertarian for the current version of the Libertarian Party. And if I don't get the nomination, it is going to be for that reason.
Okay, there's a couple other questions. I asked if you get the nomination, will you accept a presidential running mate not chosen by you?
Sure, of course. The Libertarian Party has a system where they vote separately for the vice president, and I hope that it is somebody who is charismatic, and hilarious,
and speaks
and
well.
and speaks without stuttering ever. And here's a thought. Here's where it might land. It might land that I'm not the nominee for president, and the presidential nominee needs a good joke writer, and that would be my number one argument for being the vice presidential candidate.
Yeah, that would have been my follow-up. If you don't get the nomination, would you accept a vice presidential spot?
Of course I would. I'm here for the next 10 years to make this party politically viable. We have a lot of philosophers in the party. We have a lot of debate societies. We have people who work on the back end to get ballot access and all that. My talent is in being on my feet and trying to help empower and motivate people, have them lean into their authority as citizens. So I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be around, and I'll continue to be inconvenient to some people, and that just makes me a libertarian.
Well, yeah, we're all, listen, I don't agree with myself, so we got to be pains in the ass.
Exactly.
Okay, here's the last one, and then you could close with anything you'd like. And this isn't really a question; it's more of a broad thing. David asked this to the audience if they had any COVID-related questions, but I was wondering if you had any COVID-related comments. I didn't get any questions.
I do.
Okay.
I do a half-hour show called Live at 5 on Facebook every day. And one of the things I was musing a lot about when this first became, when this virus became something that was going to disturb normal life, is that I asked my audience to try to imagine a world where there is no government, there are no borders, but we still have access to science. We can see that nurses and doctors are afraid to go to work, that they're contacting their lawyers to fill out their wills and make sure their estate papers are up to date. As somebody whose job it was before things started getting canceled, it was literally my job to hang out at airports, get on airplanes, go to hotels, and this is key, make sure I shake every hand. That was literally my job. So just as a moral person, I would be doing what I'm doing now, which is isolate myself, because I assume I'm radioactive. And there are a lot of radioactive people walking around who don't feel radioactive. They just feel perfectly healthy. So, this is not a time to claim you have all the answers. It's just a time to try to, there are times where you just have to get through it, and you have to assess the problems and opportunities that come up. And I think we're going to have an opportunity on the flip side of this thing as libertarians to make an argument that even the government recognized a lot of its laws were superfluous. Mm-hmm. And that's the sort of thing I'm paying attention to right now.
Yeah, today all kinds of things got waived in Colorado, like, oh, your candidates don't have to have their things notarized.
Yeah,
then why did they ever have to have them notarized?
And in San Diego, the cops are issuing a lot of citations where under normal circumstances, they'd be slapping the cuffs on. You have to post cash bail. So it raises the question, why are we not doing that anyway? We should be doing the least intrusive thing to achieve whatever the end is, right?
Yep, agree there. All right. I think we're nearing the end. So if there's any conclusory comments that you have, this has been very lively.
Your software is pretty good. I like this StreamYard you're using. You've got it working really well. I can actually StreamYard amplifies the questions graphically, so I can see them on the monitor here as you're asking them. It's very helpful as a guest.
And you can the host, I think, I'm not sure if you can, but you probably can type in there as well yourself. It's fantastic.
You're all a bunch of just joke. It's a joke. It's a callback. We call that a callback.
Oh, no, I got it. You're supposed to go too soon. Too soon.
Yeah. It's never too soon. My friend Anthony Jeselnik, who's a great comic, his whole thing is too soon. Like, that's his hook, is that he's always too soon. And it's so much a part of his brand that when something he doesn't have to follow the news. Yeah. When something horrible happens, his phone blows up and his friends go, "Don't, Anthony, don't."
Oh, boy. Excuse me. This is my drug of choice, my Diet Dew. One sec.
Right.
Well, It's really been a pleasure having you on, Mark. I am so glad
Terrific.
that you spent this time, and I think it was a lovely, lively, challenging
Yeah,
conversation.
as they all should be. You're a great host. You know what you're doing there. You've got actually a great voice, and you're smart and everything. And not these things don't always go that well. It's awful when you have to start your day with an interview and you have to carry the interview. But I certainly didn't have to do that today. So good on you, Karen.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and I will send you links to where all these things are posted.
Yep.
So,
Won't be shy about sharing.
all right. Have an awesome day.
Okay.
All right.
Keep
Bye-bye.
banging. Thanks.